The room was quiet, but the mind inside it was not. A small desk lamp filled the corner of the room with soft yellow light, while the evening sky outside had turned dark blue. In the distance, streetlights glowed faintly, and the world beyond the window looked calm and slow. Yet, inside the small room, something felt very different. The person sat at a wooden desk near the window, papers scattered across the table and a notebook open to a blank page. Their hands rested on the desk, slightly tense, shoulders tight, and breathing shallow. From the outside, everything looked normal, but inside the mind, thoughts were moving far too fast. One thought quickly turned into another. What if something goes wrong? What if I make a mistake? What if things get worse? Each question created another, and the mind began running in circles like a machine that could not stop. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, tick, tick, but for the person sitting at the desk, time did not feel slow at all. It felt heavy. Even the smallest tasks suddenly seemed difficult, and simple decisions became overwhelming. Should the notebook be closed? Should the work continue? Should a break be taken? The mind could not decide. The person leaned back in the chair and stared at the plain white ceiling. It looked quiet and peaceful, yet inside the mind it felt like standing in the middle of a loud crowd. Thoughts and worries overlapped endlessly, and even small problems began to feel much larger than they really were. The strange thing about stress is that it rarely arrives all at once. Instead, it grows slowly, one small worry today, another tomorrow, a little pressure from work, a small disappointment, a moment of doubt. At first these things seem harmless, but when they stay in the mind for too long, they begin to pile up like books stacked higher and higher on a table until the weight becomes too much. That was exactly how the person felt in that moment. Heavy, tired, and mentally exhausted. The person gently closed the notebook, the soft sound of the paper touching the desk echoing slightly in the quiet room. Outside the window, a cool breeze moved the branches of a tree, and the leaves swayed slowly under the streetlight. Everything outside seemed calm and peaceful. Yet inside, the mind kept asking questions. Why can't things just feel calm? Why does everything feel so intense? The person stood up and walked slowly toward the window, the wooden floor creaking softly beneath each step. Looking outside, the empty street appeared almost frozen in silence. A few cars were parked along the road, and a single dog wandered quietly along the sidewalk. For a moment, the peaceful scene helped the mind slow down slightly. But soon the thoughts returned, even stronger than before. The brain began replaying moments from the past, small mistakes, awkward conversations, unfinished tasks, and things that had happened long ago. Yet the mind treated those memories as if they were happening again in the present. The person sighed softly. It felt strange that the outside world could be so calm, while the mind felt like a storm. Many people believe stress comes only from big problems, but that is not always true. Sometimes stress grows from the mind itself, from overthinking, from imagining too many possibilities, and from trying to control things that cannot be controlled. The human brain is powerful. It can solve problems, create ideas, and build dreams. But sometimes the same brain becomes the source of pressure. The person slowly returned to the chair. The desk lamp still glowed with the same soft light, and the notebook still waited on the table. But the mind felt tired, not physically tired, but mentally exhausted. It was the kind of tiredness that comes from thinking too much and carrying invisible worries. The person placed both hands on the desk and looked down at the blank notebook page. It looked simple and peaceful, yet the mind behind it felt crowded. The strange thing about the human brain is how quickly it reacts to pressure, even when nothing dangerous is happening. Even when the room is safe and the night is quiet, the brain sometimes behaves as if a storm is coming. The heart beats faster, the body becomes tense, and the breathing grows shorter, all because the mind believes something is wrong. But that night, something felt different. Not outside, but inside. For the first time, the person began to notice something interesting about their thoughts. Every stressful thought followed the same pattern. A thought appeared, the mind chased it, then another thought appeared, and the cycle continued. It was like being pulled along by an endless chain of worries. But what if the cycle could be interrupted? What if the mind did not have to follow every thought? The person leaned back in the chair once more. The soft lamplight created gentle shadows across the desk, and the room remained perfectly quiet. Slowly, the person closed their eyes. Instead of fighting the thoughts, they simply noticed them. One thought appeared, then another. But this time the mind did something different. It paused. Just for a second. That tiny pause felt unusual, almost strange, yet also slightly calming. The person slowly opened their eyes again and looked around. The same room, the same desk, the same quiet night. Nothing outside had changed. Yet something small inside the mind had shifted. A quiet realization was beginning to form. Maybe the mind did not need to react to every stressful thought. Maybe calmness was not something that suddenly appeared when everything became perfect. Maybe calmness was something the brain could learn. The person looked again at the empty notebook page. This time it did not feel overwhelming. It simply looked like a blank page waiting patiently. For the first time that evening, the shoulders relaxed slightly, and the breathing became deeper. The storm inside the mind was still there, but it was no longer as loud as before. And within that quiet moment, the beginning of a new understanding slowly appeared. A small psychological shift. A different way of responding to stress. Something simple, yet surprisingly powerful. The person had not fully discovered it yet, but the realization was close. Very soon, it would reveal itself and completely change the way the mind handled chaos. The room was still quiet, illuminated by the same desk lamp that glowed softly on the wooden table. Its warm yellow light filled the small corner of the room, while, outside the window, the night had grown deeper and the street had become almost completely empty. Yet something inside the room felt slightly different. The person remained seated in the chair, looking at the blank page of the notebook. For a long moment, nothing happened. The thoughts were still there. They had not disappeared, but they were no longer rushing like before. Earlier, every thought had felt urgent, like an alarm that demanded an immediate response. Now they seemed slower, almost distant. Leaning back in the chair, the person quietly observed the mind again. A new thought appeared. What if things go wrong tomorrow? Previously, that thought would have started a long chain of worries. But this time something different happened. The mind paused. Instead of chasing the thought, the person simply noticed it. It floated through the mind for a moment, and then slowly faded away. It was a small moment, yet it felt important. The person frowned slightly, curious about what had just happened. For years, every stressful thought had been treated like a command. The brain reacted, instantly analyzing it, fighting it, trying to solve it. But now something new was happening. The mind was observing the thought instead of following it. The person placed both hands calmly on the desk and took a slow breath in, then out. The breathing felt deeper now, more natural. The mind seemed quieter, not completely silent, but calmer than before. Another thought appeared. You still have many things to finish. Again, the mind noticed the thought. But this time, the person did something very simple. Instead of reacting, the thought was silently labeled. Just one quiet word formed in the mind. Thought. Nothing more. It was not treated like a problem or a warning, just a thought. Something unusual happened again. The thought quickly lost its power. It lingered for a moment but did not pull the mind into a storm of worries. The person blinked slowly as a quiet realization began to grow. For so long, the brain had been reacting automatically. The thought appeared, and the reaction immediately followed. But what if there was a small space between them? A tiny pause, a moment where the mind could choose how to respond. Leaning forward slightly, the person rested their elbows on the table. The lamp's light reflected softly on the notebook page. The blank paper no longer felt heavy or overwhelming. It simply looked empty and peaceful. Looking around the small room, the person noticed the bookshelf standing quietly near the wall, the curtain moving gently in the cool night breeze, and the ticking clock marking each passing second. Tick, tick, tick. Earlier, that sound had felt stressful. Now it simply sounded like time moving forward. Closing their eyes again, the person noticed another thought appear. This problem might become worse. Instead of reacting, the mind gently whispered the same label. Thought. Soon another thought followed. You are not ready. Again the same response. Thought. One by one, the thoughts appeared and faded like clouds slowly drifting across the sky. Some clouds were darker than others, yet none stayed forever. For the first time, the person realized something important. The brain produces thousands of thoughts every day. Some are helpful, some are not. But the mind does not have to believe every thought, and it certainly does not have to chase each one. The real power was not in stopping thoughts that would be impossible. The real power was in choosing how to respond. When the person opened their eyes again, the room looked the same, the desk looked the same, but the feeling inside the chest had changed. The tight pressure that had been there earlier had softened. The shoulders relaxed slightly, and the breathing felt steady. After a moment, the person looked back at the notebook page and slowly picked up the pen. It felt lighter in the hand, not because the problems had disappeared, but because the mind was no longer fighting every thought at once. The first word appeared on the page, then another. The writing moved slowly but calmly. Outside the window, the quiet street remained peaceful. A distant car passed under the streetlight, and the cool wind continued moving the leaves of the tree. Everything outside felt steady, but the real change had happened inside. The person paused and looked at their reflection in the dark window. The same face looked back, yet the expression had softened. The tension that once filled the eyes had eased, not because life had suddenly become easy, but because the mind had learned something new. Stress often grows when the mind believes every thought must be solved immediately. Yet many thoughts are only temporary visitors. They arrive, stay for a moment, and then leave. If the mind stops chasing them, they lose their power. The person returned to writing, slowly filling the page line by line. The work was not perfect, but it was moving forward, and for the first time that evening, progress felt calm. Minutes passed quietly. The storm inside the mind had not completely disappeared, but it had become manageable like distant thunder far away from the house. It could still be heard, but it was no longer frightening. Eventually, the person placed the pen gently on the table and leaned back in the chair. The lamp still glowed softly, and the room felt peaceful. Taking one more slow breath in and out, the mind felt steady. A small smile appeared, not a loud or excited one, just a quiet smile that comes when something important is finally understood. The secret had never been about controlling the world outside. Chaos would always exist somewhere, unexpected problems, uncertain moments, difficult days. But the mind had discovered something stronger. A simple pause, a small space between a thought and a reaction. Inside that space, calmness could grow. Inside that space, the mind could choose peace. The person reached over and turned off the desk lamp. The room slowly faded into soft darkness while the calm night continued outside the window. And inside the mind, something even more powerful had begun, not silence, but balance. A calm mind learning how to stand steady, even when the world becomes loud.